Feeling the need for change is at the heart of your ability to make it happen. Welcome to Turning Inward. I'm Vivian Carrasco, your midwife, teacher, and host for this podcast. Together, you and I are going to navigate the interior life, and we're going to do that by unearthing our personal truths, our own insight, and our inner knowing. These are weekly teachings that are brought to you by hard-nosed scientific evidence focused on spiritual direction with integrity and self-awareness. In 2 words, this is your inner work. Hello, James Schramko. I invited you to talk with me for my podcast because I'm in your super fast business membership group and enjoying every minute of it. Everyone listening, please go and join. James is a real deal. But you were talking about mindset, and I asked you who your mentor was, and I expected, is it a habit or a pattern, to hear a name. And you said something that just made such an impact on me that I wanted to just know more about your strategy and your experience. You said, spend some time looking in the mirror.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are looking outwards all the time. I remember getting a quote from someone I was learning from, and he was talking about people walking around in life with their umbilical cord in hand, looking to plug in. And I think at the time he was talking about employees, how they're so dependent on the employer and they can't think for themselves or make decisions or be responsible. And it frustrated him as an entrepreneur. So he was sharing that insight with me. And I know that someone famous quoted that well before he taught that to me. But it did strike me as interesting. And I look at most of the turning points in my life have come where I've taken more responsibility. And I think the ultimate responsibility is to yourself. Even if you have kids or partners, it's really hard to provide for other people until you look after yourself. And if you look around, there's plenty of evidence that people aren't really in tune with where they're at, and they're not thinking about stuff, and they're certainly not questioning some of their decisions. For example, I just read something this morning about a quarter of people 35 to 40-something have student debt, and it's quite a problem in the United States. So that, these things can get out of control if we're always looking outwards and not looking inwards.
Very good point. And that's actually the name of the podcast, is Turning Inward. How do you begin to do that when society says you have to be and do certain things to get respect?
Well, I think for me, reading and understanding more about the world, especially finding out about history, and even more so finding out about our history, it's sort of revealed some insights into why we do things, and it also makes you become more aware. Because if a lot of people are actually walking around in a trance, they're doing the things that marketers have suggested they do, they're exposed to a lot of messages, I think it can lead to a situation where people aren't making their best decisions that they could make because they don't have the information. So I think the first step is seeking the information.
Has your definition of success changed over the years?
Oh, many times. I think that it certainly starts out with the ones that your parents lay onto you and your peer group expose you to, and then it changes the more you become aware of or tune into who you are. And success is definitely different for me now than it would have been 10 years ago or 10 years before that. And part of that is going through that survival struggle phase where you leave home, you start your own family, you have to provide for them, and a lot of the reasons I was doing things so I would have justified as for the family, but the whole time I think we doing things for ourselves, but it's convenient to label it to someone else's responsibility. And the ultimate idea of success for me now, it's got a lot less to do with money and freedom. It's more to do with maximizing the time that I can choose to do things that bring joy. And once you reach a certain amount of finance and a certain amount of time availability or resource, then it really changes the things like relationships and your pastimes. You know, what do you actually do when you can choose what to do instead of this idea that you're trapped into doing something because you have to do it. And there was certainly, you go back 10 or 20 years, I was doing things because I felt I probably had to do them, and I didn't feel like I had a lot of choice. And now I have a lot more choice. So it means that I'm not doing things that I really don't want to do, and it makes for a richer and more full life.
The only thing I can say to that is amen. But what I found is that I had to get to that status or that level before I could let go of the idea that it was going to give me the happiness or the sense of meaning that I was looking for.
Yes, I can understand that, because I was listening to a student of mine yesterday on a call talking about dealing with a supplier in China. And he told me that the guy he visits in the factory has a BMW 7 Series and a wardrobe full of fancy suits and watches, but he lives in the factory. He doesn't actually have a house, and he has these things to be impressive in business because that's what's expected when dealing with foreign companies. And it just felt so wrong hearing that people get to that extreme. And I've even been through little mini revolutions of that. I did spend a lot of time with Mercedes-Benz because I worked for them, and since then became a customer. And I've appreciated good products, but I know that the motivation for buying something good like that is through the love of the experience and the engineering. But it also, there is that side thing of confidence. And I had other nice things too. Sometimes I've had them taken away. I used to have a mentor who would take away anything nice that I'd find. If I found a nice number plate and put it on my car, he would have it taken off. He was always trying to teach me a lesson about things owning you and you not owning things. And I had a nice watch, but it got stolen last year. And I hadn't really had a desire to wear a watch since then. I don't feel like I need it as much as I felt like I might have needed it when I got it about 11 years ago. Back then it was, I was an employee. It was one way to stamp my confidence within the group that I was in. It was part of the uniform. I guess a little like the Chinese worker. It was part of how you operate in the motor industry at a high level. So now I'm stripping away a lot of that stuff, and it doesn't really matter so much. I'm more interested in catching a nice wave out the front here on a surfboard that is pretty easy to come by.
Say more about that surf, because you so love surfing.
I do love it, and some people think I talk about it too much, but that's historically what I do. If I'm interested in something, I'll be obsessed with it and immerse myself into it. So I did that with cars when I was a teenager, and I went right through the automotive industry. And then about 10 years ago, I was absolutely obsessed with online marketing. I wanted to know everything about it, and I couldn't stop talking about that. These days, it's surfing. And surfing just unlocked a whole next level of life for me, because it's got such a profound impact on you at the core, because it changes the way that you think about nature. It helps you understand energy management better. Mm-hmm. Not just catching the energy of a wave, but also you're genuinely tired at night, so you sleep better. You eat better because you want to be able to perform well, and you don't want dirty food because it just interferes with the experience. I like the culture, how people are very friendly to each other. They've got something in common, and they are more tuned in, I think. They're more aware. Even when you're on a wave, you have to be aware of who's beside you so you don't run into someone. So I think your acuity actually increases and your concentration ability is good. And it's one of the few sports that you can finish cleaner than you start. So it is quite good. And then it opens up other things like travel. Surf travel's a thing where you experience different cultures and go to different places for different waves. And for me, of course, it unlocked a lot of old passions like the technology and the history of surfing. You know, the design of the boards. It's a lot like the car passion and the technology and the way that people are marketing their equipment and how surf shops operate appeal to my retail and online experience as well.
So in a lot of ways, we stay the same, but change the level of maybe that experience and the joy in the way we live, is what I hear you saying.
I'd say so, because we're kind of a DNA strand, and like that's our hardware. So I think we start with our hardware, and we continually upgrade our software, or not, as we age. And it's, you know, installing new upgrades to the software has been really interesting and exciting. I think when you read a new book or you start thinking about new things, that's kind of like opening up the next patch or install that can tune the machine better. You still might have physical limitations because of the hardware we have, but I think the software is infinitely changeable.
I agree. Now, I know that you have children. I have grown-up sons. How has raising them or instilling a sense of responsibility or expectations changed from the way you grew up, maybe?
Well, they've grown up with the internet compared to me. So, you know, when I was a kid, it was BMX bikes and no tech. For them, it's I've made an effort to do analog things with them. So they've started an interest in things like surfing and motocross and snowboarding. We just went for a snowboarding weekend. It's great to see them take physical challenges. And the thing about those things is you can't outsource that. You can't direct it or stand back and have things automate for you. You have to commit. You have to launch yourself down the hill or over the jump or onto the wave. There's no escaping the ultimate responsibility. And it was great watching them come up against their boundaries. And, you know, the big chairlift was frightening on the first day and built up to that. So, you know, watching them go through that beginner mind and apply their previous behaviors and their experience bank to new disciplines is good. And just general life skills. You know, a lot of people these days are specialists and they're really, really good at one thing and they suck at pretty much everything else. They're just not, we are not as a species as capable as we were when we were hunter-gatherers. When we knew what to eat, we knew where to sleep, we knew how to make fire, we could hunt our own food, grow things, or, you know what food to eat. So now we've sort of become spear makers, or, you know, we're good at one thing and we don't really have a general sense of life skills. So I've always approached educating my kids differently to other parents. I'm not obsessed with academia like a lot of parents are. I'm not forcing them to be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer like most parents. I want them to explore their own unique possibilities. And it's really interesting watching these days on the internet. You don't have to go far to see some kids bragging about their achievements. So, you know, 11-year-olds or 14-year-olds, they're publishing books and stuff. My kids had done things like that, but they weren't being precocious braggers on internet media platforms. They're a little more private. So I'm proud that they've got these skills. but I also think it's good they have a balance of humility and they're not carnival acts.
That's a very good point, because society is almost watching for that. And I think there's a movie, but for the players out there. And
it's a cultural thing at the moment, certainly on Facebook. Is a lot of bragging. The people who are getting all the eyeballs are bragging themselves stupid, and it's kind of unappealing.
Well, and on the other end, someone's comparing and despairing. They're like, I'm not, this, or I wasn't invited to that.
Absolutely. If an 11-year-old's publishing books, they really are rubbing it in the face of any adult that hasn't. They are literally saying that in their videos, and I think it could be quite harmful. But I think what's even more harmful is these kids have no life experience beyond what they're experiencing now. I'd be really concerned about them in 20 years from now. I wonder what's going to happen to them.
I agree. So where do you, speaking of 20 years from now, where do you see the landscape, or how do you see the landscape of business changing because of this culture that we're seeped into, where we're not getting analog?
I think there's some things that won't really change as long as we're dealing with people. I mean, at some point in the future, they say with biotechnology, we start morphing into immortals where we don't necessarily have an end date, but we could still die, if we're squashed by an electric car or something. But our bodies won't fade away as much. So I think if people are having extended lives, it'll be really interesting what happens with so many people on the planet if we don't destroy ourselves first. I think that there will be some common factors in business that won't go away, and that will be integrity, trust. I think trust and confidence are something that people gravitate towards when they're not sure. They'll just go with what they feel is right. And for me, that's been the long-term play, is just to never abuse the trust of a client. And if you can stick to that, which hopefully people can, and not sell shifty products, not go for the cheap tricks, then they'll be okay in business. But in the 10 or 11 years I've been online, I've seen so many people come and go because they focus on the wrong things, and they have a flawed mindset where they're going for the quick win, or they think that people are less intelligent than they actually are, and it comes back to bite them. Or they build business models around a fad, and that fad disappears, and then they're left with nothing, no real asset. So one of the whole things I've encouraged people to do is to build their own asset. One asset they should definitely build is their reputation. And beyond that, it's something that they could actually sell. If they're creating something they could sell, then it's probably worth being an entrepreneur. If not, then it's probably going to be much easier for them to work for someone else and get a guaranteed profit, not have all the stress and hassle that comes with running your own business.
That's a really interesting point. So I agree with you. I think there are some people in this world who think they want to be entrepreneurs, but really don't have those sort of ability to deal with risk and ambiguity and focus on the long-term game versus the short-term. How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's not for everyone, that's for sure. I mean, a lot of the work that I do is focusing on taking people from a 6-figure business to a 7-figure business. And there's a huge mindset change that has to happen for that transition. And I think it is rarefied air. I mean, only a small percentage of the population will ever make $1 million a year. There's obviously, the small percentage that do make the vast majority of the money because they're in a different zone. But I think being an entrepreneur, it's very challenging. It's a constantly changing environment. It requires strength and discipline in certain areas that a lot of people lack. And I think that they've got people working against them. Right now at Facebook, there are very smart engineers working on how to get people attached to that platform, to keep them coming back, to override their routines and habits, to make sure that these social media platforms are getting their attention. So if they're not strong enough to resist those things, they're not going to be able to run their own business properly.
I've seen that even with close family members, where the focus is on, head down into the screen and not eye-to-eye conversations even.
You don't have to look far to see that. Any cafe, airport, people walking down the street, things like Pokemon Go right now is causing a major chaos where we're moving into that next augmented reality phase, which we've been hearing is going to be so big. The crossover between real and imaginary is blending, and it does require quite a lot of discipline. For me, that's another big tick in the surfing box. It's a non-tech activity that gives you time to think, and I can see why so many people get overwhelmed, overloaded, depressed, frustrated, confused. It's really easy to fall into that trap if you're not guarding yourself. And again, we come back to the mirror. The person who can make the most impact on your life is you, not someone else. It's not the person running the country. It's not a secret society pulling strings behind the curtain. It's not your old teacher or your parents. It's you. And when we face that, it's a really confronting thing to have to face, because it means we've got to do the work. We can't hope to win the lottery anymore. And when there's a big lottery payout, you'll see huge lines at the shop. A lot of those people, probably not all of them, but a lot of those people, that is their success strategy. They're planning to win the big lottery. That's it. And I feel for those people, because it's very unlikely they will win. Even if they did, within 2 years, they'll be back to square one, most likely. So it makes sense to have a better strategy than that, one that's far more within your control, and that's starting with yourself, like arming that software with better knowledge and having the discipline to execute on that.
And it sounds like it's a lot about mindset. That's why we'll go back to square one if we haven't leveled up.
I really think life is a lot about mindset. It's that's what separates us from other species, is the cognitive abilities that we have. In particular, the ability to believe in imaginary things like money and corporations and religions, and those things drive humans. And like, we'll work all day at a Starbucks as a barista in exchange for some electrons in our bank account, because once we can believe in those things, then we really do have a powerful mind. So because we've invented languages and ability to communicate with each other, I think it makes sense to master those things, to get very good at the communication, to get really good at being able to imagine imaginary things. So as an entrepreneur, we're always coming up with ideas, creativity, and plans, and we have to get it from our head and communicate it to our team and to the world. And it's, for me, the reality of that really set in when I sold my business earlier this year that I originally just came up with in a workshop. It was just an idea that popped into my head, and I used a second-hand domain, and I built out a business that went on to generate more than $1 million a year. And then I sold it. And to take an idea from just an idea to electrons in the bank account is, it's just amazing. It's an unprecedented time in history where we can do this So I think that's why I get excited about it.
What were the mindset shifts that you saw in yourself and that you see in your clients in that transition?
For clients, where they usually come unstuck is they have to let go of a lot of the programming that's been put there. Especially, there's a lot of things that you can focus on to make more profit, and most people focus on the wrong two things. In particular, the one that makes the least amount of difference that holds people back is the one they focus the most on, and that's usually the costs. They're cost obsessed. It's how can they reduce costs, and that's a flawed game because you can only cut costs by 100%. So, if you are making $500,000 a year and you cut 100% of your costs, then you can only make $500,000 profit. Whereas if you focus on other parts of the equation, like conversions, if you're converting 2% of your traffic and you're generating $500,000 a year, and you were able to somehow get it up to 4% conversion of your traffic, you can go to $1 million a year in revenue. Even if your costs are 50%, you went from $250,000 profit to $500,000 profit by just adjusting your conversion rate. And that's just one of the things that you can adjust. And there's so many other things you can focus on. So people are usually focused on the wrong thing. They're not ready to spend enough. They're making too high a profit margin, and they are spending their attention on the things that make the least amount of difference. So it takes discipline and it's a bit counterintuitive to focus on other areas and to let it go. To let go of worrying about costs is hard. I'm not saying be negligent, but I'm just giving you an example of how focusing in a different area can get you such a bigger result for the same amount of energy or less amount of energy. So it's constantly keeping them on focus. For some, it's the building a routine because they get pulled around. There's a lot of things pulling on you at the multi-100,000 mark that don't really affect you as much as a solopreneur. So you have to focus a lot more on managing your team and building a machine. So creating a sales offer that works, that you can get people to without involving you as much, and that once people do order something, that it can be delivered to them without involving you so much. So there's a few things that go into making that work. But you need a compelling offer. You need supply. You need a team. You do need some systems, like a technology stack of things that can make that all work automatically for you. And then you have to drive this whole machine. Like, you've got to steer that machine around the market. You've got to avoid the potholes and watch out for the market disappearing. Like the video rental scene kind of got squashed by Netflix, and the old camera film companies got squashed by digital technology. So you have to watch out for those little things. That's why it's not an easy job, but it's definitely rewarding if you can nail it. And last night I did a call with 7 of my students, and 7 in a row were having record results. Some had achieved their yearly target by halfway through the year. Other ones were 50% up on this time last year. Most of them were running out of capacity to deliver, which is a pretty good problem to have, but it's a common one. And that's where they haven't resourced enough structure to be able to cope with more customers, because we're getting the front end offering working correctly, and their reputation is increasing, their authority is increasing. People want to deal with them. They're preeminent in the marketplace, and now they need to build out more of the machine to be able to make more units to deliver on all the people who want to deal with them, which is really exciting for them. They're making a bigger impact in the world with whatever they're doing, and they all have good products and services.
When you said you can only reduce costs by 100%, what I heard you also saying is that, well, you can increase capacity by 1,000%. That's why reducing costs only gives you so much leverage.
That's right. It's got a cap on it.
One of the things I teach my boys, because probably because I'm not a good budgeter. I don't like slicing the pizza smaller. I like making the pizza bigger.
Yeah, so that's the old, that's the market share thing versus the overall market. You can just add more pizzas. You want to, I guess budget mentality altogether is a thing that hurts people, especially when it comes to marketing, because they are dealing in fixed parcels of budget, and that's just not how it needs to work. So you'll hear a company say, well, we've maxed out our marketing budget, but they obviously don't have a functional advertising funnel, because if you can figure out a way to generate more than $1 of profit back for every dollar that you spend, then why would you limit that to a budget?
Good point. Now, James, for those that are listening that aren't familiar with your work, where can they find you?
Head over to superfastbusiness.com. That's the main website where we have our community and lots of podcast episodes and some free training. I think for your listeners too, they might really be interested in some of the podcasts that I do with my co-hosts, because we have some pretty interesting sort of variations on that. I reckon the one for your audience that they might be interested in would be thinkactget.com with Ezra Firestone and I, where I guess that podcast reveals more of my softer side, and it's more of a thinking podcast where we discuss and blend business with life philosophies, picking a topic per episode.
I actually wasn't aware of that one. I thought I was following all your podcasts, so thank you for bringing that up.
That's I've got to improve my marketing.
Especially for someone that's like knee deep into your work. I don't know why.
I do have a lot of work though. I've got plenty of podcasts.
Of work. Now, before I let you go, I didn't come up, but I want to just this story, this mentor that you talked about earlier. Is that I forgot how you call him. The
lunatic millionaire?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that I think people overall don't recognize, and this is why I'm drawing us back to this, is that sometimes the relationships that are difficult on the surface level are teaching us very valuable lessons. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think everything can be instructional. Even if you lose money on the share market, that's an investment in experience in what not to do, and it shapes you. And go back to this metaphor of surfing. These waves, they slap you down hard if you take them for granted or you approach them the wrong way. It's so frustrating. And rather than give up and blame Mother Nature, which is probably a human trait, I say, well, okay, I've got to improve my approach here. I need to get my timing differently to get a different result. So it's teaching us to constantly learn from experience. So you can have negative experience and learn from it. And that's why, as I go through life, I can learn from just about anybody. I could learn from a tourist down at Manly Wharf how not to take the lid off a bottle, if they drop it and spill it everywhere. There's so many lessons out there, not just direct experience, but it's really cool to learn from other people's experience. Like when you go to a new surf spot, it's good to watch other people catch a few waves first to learn where you have to be and what dangers are there lurking. You can also ask people. When I went to the Philippines a few weeks ago, I asked them if there's any things that I should be aware of, and he pointed out a submerged rock that was just, not quite visible, and it would have been fairly easy to paddle over. And it's nice to get that experience from someone who knows the lay of the land and can guide you from making a simple mistake. So learn from your own experience, learn from other people's experiences, and if bad things happen to you, you get a bad boss, which is the case we're talking about, quite often I would just reverse whatever he did, and I would end up with a great result. And as an employer, I've made specific efforts to be a much kinder employer than my boss was to me. So I'm not passing on the bad habits like a lot of parents do with kids, and the kids turn into bad parents and so on, in this cycle of ignorance.
Wonderful insight. James, you are honestly a philosopher, and I appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me, Vivian.
If you want more help moving forward and breaking out of a negative mental pattern, I personally host an online community of practice for smart, successful women and a few super cool dudes that gives you more support, tailored training, and an unlimited professional coaching. Visit my digital home at viviancarrasco.com to learn more. With integrity and self-awareness. In 2 words, this is your inner work.